before I go any further, I'd like to talk about the versions that I have of the thing at the moment. Now, I have two versions. I don't have all of the versions of the thing. I used to have the thing on VHS tape, but I don't have that anymore. I also used to have the thing on an old DVD, but I don't have that anymore. But what I have currently are these two. This is the Shout Factory Scream Factory Blu-ray from the US, and this is the Arrow. This is the Steelbook version, actually. This is the Arrow version of the thing, and this is from the UK. So I have this from the US and this from the UK, and so the presentations are different, and I want to get into those just a little bit today. Now, I haven't gone through a kind of side-by-side comparison of the image quality, so this isn't necessarily to get into what other sites I think get into very well, which is a comparison of different versions, etc. That's not something that I'm particularly good at, but just to let you know, this is what I have, and I'll just try to explain what's on each of these versions to the best of my ability. So let's begin with this version, which is the Shout Factory Scream Factory Blu-ray of this. Now, this is a 2-disc Blu-ray, and it presents the film with what it purports to be a 2K scan of the film, which is supervised by the director of photography, Dean Cundy. And we also have on the first disc the film itself, but also we have accompanying it, we have, it says here 2 audio commentaries, but in fact there are 3 commentary tracks. So the first commentary track is one with Dean Cundy, again the director of photography. Now this is actually a very interesting audio commentary track for a number of reasons. One, Dean Cundy is a great speaker. He is, of course, a very key person in the world of John Carpenter. His look, his feel, his outlook, and his view, his eye as a director of photography in these John Carpenter films is, I think, without question, truly remarkable and outstanding. So to hear his commentary is quite illuminating and very informative. He also talks about his working relationship with John Carpenter and the extent of his knowledge with respect to certain production details about this particular film, The Thing, because if there's a lot of very interesting things about The Thing, amongst which are the production details, how this film was made. It has a very, I think, rocky and turbulent history, which makes, I think, its production stories all the more fascinating. And Dean Cundy is certainly a part of that. So that commentary track is actually quite great for that reason. But there's actually also there are some other things that he says that that really made, how should I put it? There are certain comments that he made in this commentary track that were quite interesting, in that he talks about certain elements of the visual style or certain ways in which some shots of the film were shot and lit. And he says that there was a reason behind the way certain shots were lit and shot. Now, I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I don't want to spoil it now. I want to get into that in the spoilers part of this discussion. But some of his comments were suggestive of the fact that perhaps there were some purposeful reasoning behind the way certain characters were lit and shot, to perhaps suggest the fact that some characters, when they were lit and shot in a certain way, might have been already assimilated into the thing. So he makes certain comments like this that I think are quite provocative in many respects, and they go into many of the theories behind the thing and who is the thing at what point in time, etc. So I want to get into those comments in particular in the spoiler section of this video, but what he says, I think, is quite, as I say, quite provocative and really very amazing. So highly, highly worth it. So that's the first audio commentary track with Dean Cundy. The second audio commentary track is actually not listed here, and that's with co-producer Stuart Cohen. Now, I find this commentary track to be really great because he goes into a lot of the details about the production background of the thing, and oh gosh, there are so many twists and turns with respect to how this film ever got made in the first place, and its long history. It actually has quite a long history prior to 1982 of efforts trying to get this film made, some involving filmmakers other than John Carpenter. And so to hear Stuart Cohen talk about this process, I think, is really quite fascinating. He also talks about the production stories themselves, and he is, I think, very refreshingly blunt when it comes to certain stories. He doesn't mince words. He is not in any particular fashion mean or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. On the contrary, he's very straight to the point. I sense that he has a certain sense of honesty about how he viewed certain ways in which, for instance, John Carpenter worked with the actors and crew. He doesn't necessarily hide the fact that there might have been certain tensions on set between some persons here and other people there, and he's very specific about who. So I really enjoy the upfrontness of his commentary track. I think it really is great. You know, sometimes with supplemental features and the like, there is a tendency sometimes to have supplemental features only talk about the positives. Sometimes the negative aspects, you know, the tensions between certain people on set or between the cast and crew are not always focused on in the supplements, right? But when they are focused on, I think they are to the credit of the production, because rather than create a sense of, let's say, drama or this kind of, oh, this person didn't like that person, that kind of, it doesn't have that sense of any sort of petty, like petty gossip, right? On the contrary, Stuart Cohen is saying these stories for the fact that I think the production was very difficult. It was very taxing on many members of the cast and crew, because the pressure was quite high to create something that was really top of the line, great artistic stuff. And so I think those are the reasons behind those tensions. And I also, we also see a glimpse into the way John Carpenter works. He tends to be, and I think this is a good thing, he tends to be portrayed in the commentary as being somewhat of a perfectionist, you know, in terms of how he makes the film. Maybe he sees, we find out, for instance, that he saw a certain cut of this film, The Thing, and early on in the production stage, and John Carpenter wasn't satisfied, and so there was a period where there was a bit of reworking, quite a bit of reworking actually, with respect to the story and adding things and taking certain things away. And so there was a period in which this was reworked, which is not dissimilar to stories about how, for instance, the earlier John Carpenter film The Fog was made. If you recall, The Fog there was a first cut of the film The Fog, but it was realized that it wasn't scary enough, and so it was decided to go back and add a certain significant amount of scenes to that film to create its final cut. Well, something very similar happened here with The Thing, at least according to Stuart Cohen's commentary, and also other supplements detailing the production history. And so to hear his upfront frankness and describing some of these details, I think, is really refreshing. It's honest. It's also very key, and it's in no way detrimental to one's appreciation of the thing, the film. On the contrary, I think knowing how difficult some of these decisions were, and knowing how people were trying to do their very best, I think is very assuring, and it actually makes me admire this film so much more. So I would strongly recommend the Stuart Cohen audio commentary track if you haven't listened to it already. Next, we have the third audio commentary track here, which is between John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. And if I think there were any doubt as to the power of the collaboration between John Carpenter on the one hand and Kurt Russell on the other, I think at the very least those doubts will be distinguished, not distinguished, they will be extinguished during the hour 45 minutes or so that this film is played and that commentary track goes on, because the chemistry between these two as they're talking about this film, The Thing, and their reaction to this film is really quite magical and one-of-a-kind stuff. It just, I think, is so exemplary of their working relationship and the kind of gold that they really produced, that the working relationship produced. And so, and this is certainly one of those great big nuggets of gold. It might even be one of the biggest nuggets of gold in their working relationship. So their commentary track is one of the best, so highly recommended. It's actually, I think, quite a famous one, and it's one that is revered by many. So, but if you haven't heard it yet, I would strongly recommend it. So that's on that's on the first disc in this Shout Factory, Scream Factory release. But then we also have. Also, there are actually other things on that first disc, which are, I think, theatrical trailers, and also there are TV spots and radio spots, and also there's I think a stills gallery as well, in terms of posters and lobby cards, and also behind the scenes stills. So you can get all that stuff on the first disc. And then the second disc is packed, absolutely packed with a lot of stuff. So I'm going to try to go through all of that as quick as possible here. But first, there's a conversation between Mick Garris and John Carpenter. And this is a contemporarily created production. So this is well after the fact. So they're looking at it, the film, from many years after the fact. And so I love the conversation between the two of them. They have a nice rapport. John Carpenter has a kind of I mean, whenever he's seen speaking on camera, he's just so cool. And he's got this sort of tough guy, devil-may-care, yet attitude that is still infused with such a love of cinema that is so infectious and so lovely that it's just the coolest combination of character traits, I think. And to hear him talk about this film is really quite remarkable. So that's great. And then there is a great supplement called The Men of Outpost 31. And these are interviews with some of the cast of the film. So that includes Keith David, who plays Childs, Thomas Waits, who plays Windows, Peter Maloney, who plays Bennings, and others. And so to hear them talk about the film, certain scenes of the film, I think there are so many great things that they bring up. Some of them that were, I think, part of the Thing lore, the great stories of this film, and they really confirm some aspects of the filmmaking production. For instance, Peter Maloney as Bennings talks about what happens to his character and how there were certain different versions that were planned about what happens to his character, which were very interesting. Also, Keith David, for instance, talks about how he broke his hand, and so there are some shots where you don't even see his hand because they had to block it in order not to show that it was like a huge glove that was covering his broken hand and stuff. So, and there are other stories like that. And Thomas Waits, who plays Windows, talks, I think, very frankly and very honestly about how he was really how he felt about the production and how he felt after the film had been made, etc. So there are some really honest moments, some great tidbits of information, I think many of which are already known to Thing film fans around the world, but some are still quite revolutionary and new, and so really quite awesome. Then there is a great supplemental short documentary or interview with the editor, Todd Ramsey, called Assembling and Assimilation. Now, this is great. One of the things I want to talk about in the latter part of this conversation is the editing. There is something really quite special going on with the editing of this film, The Thing. And I really mean that. I think it really reaches levels of pure cinematic greatness in terms of the craft of cinema and the editing in terms of the craft of cinema. And I think it's comparable to montage, Eisenstein montage, or Kubrickian jump cuts and the like. I think there's something quite special going on here with the editing, and I think that therefore to have a conversation with Todd Ramsey included in this disc is really remarkable and wonderful. Then there is a sort of a longer supplement, which is talking about the different crew members that were dealing with separate components of different special effects on the film. This is called Behind the Chameleon. And they are talking, each of these special effects wizards and crews are talking about different components or different scenes that they're working on in the film. And it's really great because the special effects are such a key component. And what's so great about this film, too, is that there are different kinds of special effects at work here. It's not just one kind, it's many different kinds that are combined to create this whole world of wizardry and mayhem. So that's a great supplement right there. Then there is a supplement about the sounds. It's called Sounds from the Cold. And this is talking about the soundscape with supervising sound editor David Lewis Udall and special sound effects designer Alan Howarth. So this is also great. You know, the soundscape of the film The Thing is really one-of-a-kind stuff. It's remarkable. It's telling. It's creepy. It's just pure cinema magic. And so this is another great one. Next is Between the Lines, an interview with novelization author Alan Dean Foster. Now this is also something great because the novelization of The Thing is something of a revelatory novelization. Because it does have certain aspects that aren't necessarily depicted in the final film version of The Thing. It is also a wonderful example of how great novelizations can be. It is also interesting because we are talking about a novelization of a film that is based on a kind of short story or novella that already exists. So we have, therefore, a great comparison or tension or something that is going on between the original source material and the novelization, which is a derivative of the film, which is itself a derivative of the original source material. So you've got this great world of adaptation being discussed here, and it's really great to hear his technique, how he approaches it, in particular with The Thing, at what stage of the film he got the story material from which he was able to formulate his novelization. And so there are some very revelatory things that he is talking about, and also very illuminative things he is talking about in terms of his craft and how he approaches his work. Really great stuff. And then there is not quite vintage. It was a documentary called Terror Takes Shape, which is a multi-part documentary that was, I think, made for an earlier DVD release of The Thing, and it was carried over for this Blu-ray release. It's one of the great documentaries, making of documentaries, and so it has many interviews with the cast and crew compiled, and it's in many different parts, and so we get all these different interviews based on the different stages of the film, from early conception stages to production stages to post-production, etc. Incredible stuff, and it's, as I say, I think it's a carryover from an earlier DVD release which had that as a special feature, but it's a great one. So really fantastic. It's also really long too. It's, I think, about an hour and 30 minutes or so, maybe an hour 25 or so. So it's really quite long, and it's great. And then there are outtakes. There's a bit of footage with some outtakes, and then there are some vintage featurettes which feature like some shots of vintage footage of scenes actually being shot. There's some interviews with John Carpenter. There's a great interview with Kurt Russell out there in the snow and stuff, and other vintage featurette interviews that are there. And then there are also separate other vintage featurettes that are included that are also serving to be contemporary at the time promotional materials. And so I would assume that they would be, for instance, things that you could show on television or other sorts of ways to promote the film at the time of its release or prior to. So there are some really great vintage featurettes included. Then there is, let's see here, then there is another a supplement called The Art of Mike Ploog, which is really great. Then there is Back into the Cold, revisiting the filming location of The Thing, which is also really great. Another thing that's fantastic about this film is the locations, the actual locations that were used. This is something that I also want to get into in the latter part of my discussion, but as much as has been made about the characters, as much has been made, of course, about the creature effects and the monster, I think just as effective a character in this film is the atmosphere, the environment, the world, the setting, and the cold. And so the locations, I think, form a huge part of that, the augmentation of the feeling of paranoia and isolation and real bleak, cold dreariness. So that is a really great thing to see. Then there are further outtakes and there are further vintage featurettes. And there is also a production reel which has certain footage that wasn't necessarily included in the final cut. So it does provide some insight into what might have been being thought of or being planned in terms of the production history, because I don't want to give too much away, but one of the things that's really fascinating about the production history of The Thing is that there were many ways in which certain parts of this film could have turned out quite differently than how they turned out in the final product. And there are indications of this scattered about here and there, included in which is this production reel. So if you're interested in trying to figure out what some factions of the production team were thinking about, I think this is one way to think about it. Then there are other vintage behind-the-scenes footage. Then there is an annotated production archive, which includes production art and storyboards and location scouting and other production materials, which is also very fascinating. And then, speaking of different versions and how some people are trying to think of different ways to present this film, what's also included on this, which is one of the most fascinating things, is the network TV broadcast version of The Thing. Now, this is very significant because this is the version that was shown on TV in the United States. That's my understanding. And so I think, as you might assume, there might be some edits made in terms of trimming down the gross bits, the violent bits, in order to make it appropriate for viewing on TV. But also, this is reworking the material in certain aspects that's actually quite radical. I would personally consider it to be, in many respects, a different version of the film The Thing. It's almost akin, it's not quite, but it's almost akin to the different versions of Blade Runner. I don't know if you know this film Blade Runner, directed by Ridley Scott, but there are different versions of that film. The network TV version of The Thing is actually, there are some aspects that are really different. It has a different way of ending the film, which I don't want to spoil, but it's the way the film ends is different than the way that the theatrical version of The Thing ends. There's also a really interesting way in which information is presented. There is a kind of a narrator that is also imposed upon the proceedings here, and it's really quite fascinating. It provides more information than we get in the theatrical version, but it's presented in this narrator form, and so it might or might not, depending on your outlook, be successful as an artistic presentation of the thing. That being said, it is a different version of the same, it's a slight reworking of the same material, the base material. So you are getting, in a sense, the same film, but in another sense, you are getting a slightly reworked version of the thing with the network TV broadcast version. I personally prefer the theatrical cut, the original version, as it were. And that's what I will be discussing in detail going forward. But to have that network TV version as a supplement on the Scream Factory release is extraordinary, and it's one of the reasons why I strongly recommend getting the Scream Factory version. So this is the Scream Factory Blu-ray release of the thing, and I think it is really great. It is US release, so I believe it is region A. Yes, it is region A according to the back, so that might be something to consider if you are looking for a version of the thing to get. But anyway, that is the Scream Factory Blu-ray release of the thing. Next, I want to talk about the Arrow Region B release of the thing. This is the Steelbook version, which I have. And so this is, I understand, the limited edition. And so what this has a different, or purports to be a different presentation. This purports to be a 4K restoration of the film. And while I haven't done a pure side-by-side comparison of the visuals, and I haven't done a pure side-by-side comparison of the audio, I do notice, let's say, difference in visual quality. To be very general, I do sense a little bit of a sort of a more intense blue to this, and there's a certain sharpness to this, which when compared to the Shout Scream Factory release, I don't necessarily want to say, however, that this is superior to the Shout Factory release or vice versa, but I do sense that there is a different presentation of which, and I would dare say also that it does affect one's mood when watching this film to a certain degree, perhaps almost subliminally. But I don't think that one would go wrong choosing either this or the other in terms of any Blu-ray comparison is concerned. But that is to say that this does purport to be a 4K restoration, whereas the Shout Factory was purported to be 2K scan. So that might be something to consider. Also, the supplements are slightly different, and I'll try to get into that as much as possible. So first of all, in addition to the film, well, first of all, you are getting this film, everything is one disc, and this is also from the UK, so that means this is going to be, according to the back, this is region B, so that might be also something to consider. Also, in terms of the supplements, you are getting excuse me here. You're getting the audio commentary track with John Carpenter and Kurt Russell, and this is a track that I think is very famous, but it's also one that that we got earlier. Also, you're getting something new, which is an audio commentary track by podcasters Mike White, Patrick Bromley, and El Goro. And what I love about that particular podcast is that they are very good, actually quite excellent with their thing knowledge. They know the theories that are out there, and they do their best to either present support for such theories, or they try to debunk such theories. But my point is that they are working quite actively with the material as they're watching it on screen, and so I really love that. And they have a kind of, how should I put it? It's like very contemporary reviewers are looking at this film, and they're looking at it through contemporary eyes, and I really love that approach. And they're looking at it also slightly from a fan perspective point of view. So it's fun to try to follow up with what they're saying, and even with what they're saying, sometimes I find myself agreeing with what they say, or maybe disagreeing slightly with what they're saying. But regardless of whether I agree or disagree, I always find it to be such a pleasure to listen to these gentlemen speak. So that is something that is not on the Shout Factory release, which is this podcaster based commentary, which is really, really great. Okay, so then let's go to the Arrow supplements, or the Arrow only supplements, and there are some great ones here. There is a a documentary called Who Goes There in Search of the Thing, and this goes into the history of the story, all the way back from the John W. Campbell Jr. story, and then talking about its origins there, and talking about a little bit of background about him, and also talking about the way in which this film became, or the story became adapted into the film version called The Thing from Another World. Christian Nyby and Howard Hawks, but it's actually a little bit different than the original subject matter. And then we transition to the John Carpenter stage of this progression of this film. And so I think this is forms a lot of background, and I love its linkages with the earlier 1950s The Thing from Another World, and also the original short story novella, so Who Goes There. And so I think this supplement provides such key information, and therefore it's a strong supplement, one of the strongest out there. Another strong supplement on the Arrow release, which doesn't appear elsewhere, is called 1982 One Amazing Summer. Now, as I said, this film was released in 1982, which is a remarkable thing because there were so many other now considered classic films that were released in that same year. And there are so many, and I didn't actually, I knew of the quote-unquote more famous ones, but there are actually some here that I forgot were released in the same year. And so to have this retrospective type of documentary presenting this aspect of the thing, right, is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It's a great gift to those of us who really love this kind of 80s genre film cinema, and of course The Thing being part of that. But 1982, it's now considered a legendary year because there were so many films that are considered now to be such enduring classics that were released in or around the same time as The Thing, which itself is an enduring classic. So to have this supplement documentary is remarkable, and it's so long too. It's like 30 minutes or so it's really great. And then there is the Terror Takes Shape documentary that was a carryover from an earlier DVD that also appears on the Shout Factory release, which is great. Next, there is No Thing Left Unsaid, The Thing 35th anniversary panel filmed at the 2017 Texas Frightmare Weekend. And I think this is great because you had some great panel discussion, including Thomas Waits was there, Wilford Brimley was there, Keith David was there, Dean Cundy was also there. So that was really great. It's to have this recording is wonderful. So then there's also The Thing 27 Hours. It's a short film tribute by filmmaker Seth Hogan, and this also has an optional audio commentary with Hogan and also Arrow Video host. So that's a really great wonderful, loving, and curious supplement to have. Really wonderful. And then there are some fan featurettes here. So these are, for instance, Outpost 31, which is talking about one of the famous key online resources of the Thing appreciation community. Really great, and talking about its origins and the like, and also its love of the film The Thing. And then there's a We Found Something in the Ice, and then there's also the Thing tribute artwork. So these are all from the fan perspective. And then we have an annotated production archive, which is also great, and also behind the scenes section, again also with trailer and the like. So and also a new booklet. So this is packed with some great stuff, and I think there are some things that are different and new and unique to this Arrow video release that I think make it a very strong release for those of you who are looking for this. Now, this is the limited edition, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's available anymore. If you're going to look for the limited edition, you might have to try to look a little bit harder than usual. Again, I'm not sure as to its availability. So hopefully you might be able to find a version of The Thing by Arrow that is to your liking. But regardless, my friends, you have this for Region B, you have this Shout Factory, Scream Factory for Region A. Again, it's probably another great thing, another great reason to have a multi-region player or players that have different region capabilities, etc. So it's nice to have both because they have different supplements and they're slightly different presentations of the film itself. I don't want to say which is better, which one I prefer, because I do like some of the supplements, for instance, on the Arrow release, and I do like some of the supplements on the Shout Factory, Scream Factory release. To have them combined like this, I mean, it would be ideal, of course, to have everything on one package, but we can't ask for everything, I suppose. But the next best thing is to have both of them. But even if you had to choose one, I think either one is perfectly appropriate and really great. So again, they do present slightly different information as well. So you might want to look at other online resources, background information about these releases, if you are really trying to decide which one you want to get based on the presentation, the quality of the image, also the supplements. Because as I say, while there are some things that are similar, there are other things that are also quite different. So that is just a general presentation of what I own with respect to this film, The Thing.